The night smelled of champagne, gunpowder, and cheap perfume. It was the 14th of March 1930, and the Sphinx on the Boulevard de Clichy was burning every light it owned. Outside, the usual Montmartre crowd pressed against the velvet rope, sailors, artists, American tourists looking for sin they could tell their grandchildren about. Inside, the mirrored salon had been cleared of tables. A red carpet ran from the revolving door to the little stage where the naked dancers usually performed. Tonight the dancers were still naked, but they were standing in two perfect lines holding silver trays of bubbling glasses, because tonight the Sphinx was not a brothel. Tonight it was a throne room. At exactly 11:30 the orchestra struck up a strange, slow march, half Portuguese fado, half Bakongo funeral drum. The revolving door spun once more and a man stepped through who had no business being in Paris at all. He wore the full leopard skin mantle of the ancient kings of Congo, the one his great-grandfather had worn when the Portuguese first arrived in 1483. On his head sat a crown of beaten gold older than the Eiffel Tower, its cross at the front still bearing the tiny dents from when a Jesuit missionary had tried to melt it down and failed. His name was Pedro Alalo, 38 years old, born in the ruined palace of Mbanza Congo, educated by Belgian priests, exiled by Belgian rifles, and now, according to the invitation cards printed in gold ink, about to be crowned Antonio III Manicongo, Lord of Congo, Duke of the Realm, Knight of the Order of Christ, and sovereign of a kingdom that had not officially existed for 50 years. The courtesans did not giggle. They had been paid triple and threatened with worse than poverty if they did. The clients, diplomats in white tie, Portuguese secret policemen pretending to be drunk, a Vatican Monsignor who kept clutching his rosary like a lifebelt, watched in silence as Pedro walked the red carpet alone. When he reached the stage he turned, lifted the crown from the velvet cushion held by a girl who could not have been more than 19, and placed it on his own head. Then he spoke in perfect French, loud enough for every corner of the mirrored room to hear. I accept the burden my ancestors carried for 400 years. From this night forward, I am your king. A single trumpet blew somewhere in the back. Champagne corks popped like gunfire. And just like that, in a brothel that advertised all nationalities, all tastes, an African kingdom was reborn. But let me take you back, because no coronation, especially one held above a bar that smelled of absinthe and sex, happens without blood and exile behind it. Pedro's childhood ended the day the Belgians marched into São Salvador and told his father, King Manuel III, that the Kingdom of Congo now belonged to rubber quotas. The king refused. They shot him in the palace courtyard while his wives screamed behind latticed windows. Pedro, 12 years old, was carried out hidden in a grain basket on a woman's head. By the time he reached the coast he had seen his uncle flayed alive for refusing to pay taxes in ivory, and he had learned the first rule of survival. Crowns are heavier than chains, but chains are easier to see coming. He spent the next 20 years becoming someone the Europeans could not kill. In Lisbon he studied law and learned to smile while white men called him boy. In Brussels he drank cognac with the same officers who had murdered his family and memorized their weaknesses. In Paris he discovered that money and charm opened every door, and that doors once opened could be used to smuggle guns, diamonds, and hope back to a country that had been told it no longer existed. By 1929 he was rich, untouchable, and tired of waiting. The old men in the villages still sent him letters addressed to His Majesty. Portuguese spies still followed him. The Vatican still kept a file marked Congo Succession, Delicate. All that was missing was the moment. He chose the Sphinx because it was perfect. The police could not raid a place that paid them so well. The press could not mock a ceremony they were not invited to photograph. And every powerful man in Paris had a secret he did not want printed, so every powerful man would come when the invitation arrived written on heavy cream card. You are commanded to the coronation of His Most Faithful Majesty King Antonio III. They came. The Portuguese ambassador arrived first, sweating in his medals. The Belgian military attaché came next, drunk and furious. The Monsignor arrived last, clutching a papal bull that recognized Antonio's claim for the greater stability of Christendom in Central Africa. They all drank the champagne. They all watched the leopard skin settle on Pedro's shoulders. And when the crown touched his head they all, every one of them, bowed because in that room for one impossible night, a king had returned from the dead and Europe had no choice but to remember him. He never went home. The kingdom stayed in his suitcase, a leopard skin hat box lined with velvet, and in the hearts of old men who kissed his ring in the back rooms of Lisbon cafes. He ruled from a tiny apartment on the Rua do Alecrim, signing decrees that arrived by smuggled messenger, sending money for schools that taught children their grandfathers had once been subjects of a real king. Belgian officers opened his letters and went pale. Portuguese ministers invited him to dinner and called him Your Majesty through clenched teeth. The Vatican kept sending birthday cards. He grew old gracefully, still wearing the crown on quiet evenings when the radio played Fado and the Tagus smelled of salt and exile. In 1962, on a night when Paris was cold and Lisbon was colder, he put on the full leopard mantle one last time, lay down on a narrow bed, and died with the crown on his head and a smile no one understood. The Portuguese secret police arrived first. They took the crown, the mantle, the decrees, everything. The Belgian embassy sent flowers and a quiet sigh of relief. The Vatican said a mass for a faithful son who carried his cross with dignity. And in the villages along the Zaire River old women still tell children that once, in a city of lights and sin, their king came back to them across the sea, wearing gold older than cathedrals, and that for one perfect night the world remembered who they had been before the world decided they were nothing. Walk past the Sphinx today, it's a tourist trap now, all red plush and fake cancan dancers, and no one will point to the mirrored salon upstairs. No plaque marks the night a kingdom was reborn between bottles of Veuve Clicquot and the laughter of women who understood power better than most ministers. But if you stand there long enough, just before closing time, you can sometimes hear it. A slow drum, a trumpet note carried on smoke, and the soft rustle of leopard skin brushing against velvet as a king who was never allowed to go home walks the red carpet one more time. Some thrones are lost in battle. This one was found in a brothel, crowned in champagne, and carried in an old man's heart until the day he died. And somewhere in Paris, on certain nights when the moon is thin and the city forgets to sleep, they say the lights of the Sphinx burn a little brighter, as if someone inside is still raising a glass to a king who refused to let his people be forgotten. Long live Antonio III. Long live the night Europe bowed to a throne it could not see. Fade to black over the sound of distant jazz and a single leopard's roar echoing down a street that has forgotten everything except how to sell pleasure to strangers.